And where do I point this? Here? Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Charles, and thanks for the invitation to be here to talk today. Before I go on, I just want to introduce you to the European Outdoor Group. So I work at the European Outdoor Group. I'm the head of CSR and sustainability. And for those who don't know, the European Outdoor Group is an industry association for outdoor brands, retailers, and kind of anyone involved in the value chain. We have over 100 members, and we are basically a platform for pre-competitive collaboration. So we support the industry on everything that is pre-competitive. Sustainability is, of course, a huge part of, well, sustainability is predominantly pre-competitive. Whether you're from Adidas or Bergens or Autovox, you are working in the same supply chains, you are having the same issues. What we do within our CSR work, we try to educate and inspire our members. We set up a lot of kind of projects that fit gaps. We represent the industry in policy and standards development, and we work across all the areas of materials and animal welfare and social sustainability and so on. So what I'm going to talk about today is the Sustainability Data Exchange project that we've been working on for a while. And I think Delena said something really interesting about the science around sustainability. And I think what we have seen is that I've been with the European Outdoor Group for 8 years now, and I've seen sustainability go from this nice to have on the side, we're doing a few projects, isn't it lovely, to very hardcore compliance. So there's been this shift of what sustainability actually is within the brands. A few years ago, people had a few nice projects on a few topics of interest to them. And now everything is data-driven. Everything is pretty much compliance. And this is the direction that the industry, not just the sport and outdoor industry, but the textile industry in general, well, the world actually is going. So a huge part of sustainability is data. And how that data is exchanged between brands and retailers and up and down the supply chains is what I'm going to talk about today. So just to give you an introduction to what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the project, how we got there, what we've been doing. This project is a collaboration between the European Outdoor Group and the BSI, who are the Bundesverband der deutschen Sportartikelindustrie. The European Outdoor Group, we work with all of the outdoor sector in all of Europe, and the BSI is kind of thinner but wider, so they work with the wider sports industry, so they also work with equestrian and sport, gymnastics and so on, but only in Germany. So our kind of reach is short and long, and theirs is thin and wide. So I'm going to introduce you to the work we've been doing, tell you how we got there, what we did. I won't be doing a live demonstration because I need my computer for that, and obviously I don't have one, and tell you where the project's going next. Before I start, who is working with a brand? Hands up. Who's working in design? Product development? Sourcing? Marketing? Great. You're very busy, man in the green shirt. Just so I can pitch kind of what I'm going to talk about and how we present that information. So, the Sustainability Data Exchange project started around 2 years ago for the European Outdoor Group, when one of our members reached out to us, and this is verbatim, they said, "Help, we are in hell." And they said, the problem that had started to happen is more and more retailers were asking for product-level sustainability information, but there was absolutely no harmonization, no coordination. They had the feeling that maybe they were all asking the same questions, but there were a huge amount of questionnaires coming in, huge amounts of data being requested, and so on and so forth. And they literally said, "Help us." We reached out at this point to many of our members to see if this was a problem unique to that organization or if this was an industry problem. And every single person we reached out to came back immediately and said, "This is an industry problem. It would be great if you could support us on this." So, I mean, this little graphic on the right, on the left, that everyone seems to like, you know, what we've got here is a brand with 10 products working with 5 retailers. You know, this is pure fantasy. Brands actually have hundreds of products and they're working with hundreds of retailers. So you can see in a very small scale how much data is actually being passed around in all directions, and then obviously multiply that by more products, more retailers. You've got a whole bigger mess on your hands. So this is where we kind of started. So I spoke to Mighty from the BSI, and I said, is this a problem that you're experiencing? She said yes. So we kind of got together on this project. And the aims of the project have been to kind of find alignment on the product sustainability attributes. So we've been trying to actually define the data points that need to be transferred between brand and retailer. And we wanted to develop an approach to reduce the multiple requests that are flying around. A few of our members said that they have full-time members of staff working, answering these questionnaires, filling in all this information, which is kind of ridiculous because the actual data set is quite limited. What we wanted to do with the project was to develop one way to transfer the data, so one harmonized data transfer tool. And we also wanted to kind of work on the language and the vocabulary, because there was a huge amount of different vocabulary being used to say the same thing. So we wanted to try and sort it all out, tidy it all up, and see where we could get with that. So we wanted to go from something on the left, so this horrible mess of mess, to something a bit more on the right, where we've got all the data going to one place and then being tapped into by the different retailers. What was interesting is why the retailers are asking for this information, and the reasons are actually quite varied. In some instances, it's to inform consumers, it's to have those consumer conversations. In some cases, it's to put a green, sustainable eco label on them. So a few retailers do this. They have their sustainable brands and sustainable products. Interestingly here, there was also a complete lack of alignment between what the brand was, what the sustainable products in the brand's range were, and actually what the retailer was saying. And one of our brands said, this retailer's put a green badge, but that's actually not our green products. So there's complete lack of alignment. Sometimes they want this information to help them with their kind of e-commerce, so to help them lay out or section their websites. So there's a huge amount of reasons why this data is flying around, but it was very clear that there was no alignment and no harmonization. Just to make clear, the aim of this project was never to develop a digital platform. That was out of the scope of the first phase of the project. We are talking about that now in the kind of subsequent phases, but the point of the project was to develop the language and an Excel tool. What we did first was we collected a number of these questionnaires that are flying around. This was like the REI, the Globetrotter, the Zalando. So we looked at some of the big retailer questionnaires that are being passed around between the industry, and we found a number of clear topics. They're all asking for affiliations and certifications. Is it blue sign? Are you fair wear? So on and so forth. They're all asking questions about materials and chemical requirements. Is it 30% recycled? Is it PFAS free? So on and so forth. So there were certification questions, specific questions around materials and chemistry. There are a number of questions around animal welfare, so things like RWS, RDS, are these being used? There was always social questions, and there were a number of brand level questions. So does your brand have a sustainability strategy? And as we started the project, a lot of the brands were saying these are actually part of the terms and conditions between the brands and retailers. So actually, we shouldn't really be answering these questions at this time. But predominantly, they're product level questions. We saw, completely unsurprisingly, that they're all asking the same things, but in a slightly different way. So it was not a surprise that we looked at all these questionnaires, and they were clear copies of each other, just different layout, different wording, so on and so forth. Another thing we saw when we kind of reviewed the questionnaires is that there was a huge amount of confusion around certifications. So on many of the retail questionnaires, there were lists of certifications, but product certifications were mixed in with material certifications, which were mixed in with brand and facility certifications. And it really demonstrated to us a kind of lack of understanding at a retail level around certifications, what they mean and what they actually apply to. So that's when we reviewed the questionnaires. The next thing we did was we got a huge group of organisations together. We had 22 partners in our project. We had 12 brands, we had 10 retailers, and we also worked with organisations like Zalando, Decathlon, and so on. We worked with a great organisation called Excel Masters, who helped us to develop the Excel spreadsheet. I think also the group was so motivated. I think what we learned was this was such a big problem for the industry that as soon as we got started, the project moved incredibly quickly. So what we did was, I might go back one actually. I feel like I'm missing a slide. No. So we pulled all the questionnaires together. We sorted all the questions out. Every question that was slightly the same, we turned into one question. We structured it, we sectioned it, we did everything we could to tidy it up. Personally, I quite like order, and so this was a dream task for us to do. And then we went through 3 rounds of testing. So we developed the questionnaire, we threw it out to the group, we said, brands, can you fill this in? Retailers, does this provide all of the information you want? We got the feedback, we implemented the feedback, and we did that 3 times. So we had 3 cycles of kind of testing, pilot testing, and then implementation of suggestions. What we have now is this wonderful Excel questionnaire. It has lots of expanders, it has place for all of the information. It's really a wonderful, it's a beauty of a questionnaire. We also have a huge section for the master data. So in many cases, this master data is flying around between brands and retailers anyway. And that's things like recommended retail price, sizing, length, colour, EAN numbers, and so on and so forth. And we had a lot of discussions about whether should the actual sustainability information be in the same place as this master data. And we heard from the whole of the retail group that yes, going forward, they would expect this all to come together. So as well as the colours and the styles and the codes, they will also want the certifications and the information on materials. So this is just a little snapshot of what it looks like. I'll show you the structure in a minute. The questionnaire is made up of 6 tabs. The first tab is kind of a background tab, and that just contains all of the answers for the next tabs. So it's just all of the options for the drop-down list that come next. We then have a textile, footwear, and hard goods product. And each tab is designed in much the same way. There's a few differences, but they allow whoever's filling it in to input all of the master data, but also the sustainability product data on the footwear, textiles, footwear, and hard goods. There's also a tab on the brand information. So all of these kind of brand level questions, we kind of pulled those out and put them in their own place. And there's a tab on climate information. And the reason we included this tab on climate information is because many of the retailers, so Bergfreunde, Bergzeit, Intersport, Sport Conrad, Sportler, they are all in an organisation called the Outdoor Retail Climate Commitment. And they have said that going forward, they will be asking every single organisation that they work with very specific questions about the targets, attainment, and so on the climate, around the climate area. So the ORCC, which is the Outdoor Retail Climate Commitment, they actually provided all of the questions in the climate tab, and they said, going forward, these would be standard questions for them anyway. On the drop-down tab, the information is set out. So we've got a huge materials section where we go through synthetic, recycled, natural, so on and so forth. Here we aligned with the EU labelling regulation. For obvious reasons, this is data that readily exists within brands because they're putting this on the labels anyway. We also learned during this process that the EU labelling regulation is hugely out of date. And I think textile innovation has moved on so quickly. There's a whole new load of biosynthetics, so on and so forth, that are not included in the textile regulation. But I do believe it's up for revision soon, so hopefully that will be addressed. We have lots of information on chemicals. We split all the certifications into material, product, brand, production facility. There's a section on MRSL, RSLs, there's sections on climate certifications, and so on and so forth. And then there's all the countries. And what this tab does is it feeds the rest of the questionnaire. Textile, footwear, and hard goods follow a similar format. So we have a section for master data, which, as I explained earlier, is all of the information. There's a section for the product composition, which I'll go into more detail in a moment. There's a section for country of origin, and the reason we included this is because this comes directly from the LOAGEC. So this is what the information that has to be provided in France currently. And it's split into cut and sew, knitting and weaving and dyeing and printing. And again, this is purely because we wanted to align it with policy, so we aligned it quite clearly with LOAGEC, because that's what they asked for. There's space for chemical information, there's space for product certifications, and there's space for Tier 1 facility certifications, as well as throughout the whole questionnaire, there are placeholders. So if the retailer wants to ask a question that isn't there, they can add that in. If the brand's filling it in and there's an answer that isn't listed, I think we managed to get most of the answers, but if there's an answer that isn't listed, they can also fill that in. So for the product composition, we split this into outer, lining, and filling. Obviously, this is kind of the makeup of a jacket, but actually, if you're doing a pair of trousers, you just fill in one. If you have just a lining and an outer, that you also just fill in the two. So we felt that this kind of setup would allow for all products to be input. And then for each section of the garment, each component, there's the opportunity to put in a number of materials, as well as membranes, and up to two material certifications per material. Same for lining, same for filling. For each certification, there is space to add the name, the license number, the testing institute, and the expiry date. We've had a lot of questions about kind of certification management. Can we include a place for people to upload their certification so they're always there? In the Excel form, we obviously can't do that. But as this kind of phase of the project has come to an end and we're moving on and talking to platforms, there could be potential to do this going forward. Footwear follows a similar format. We have more component spaces, so we have upper, lining, insole, and outsole. Again, we use the terminology used widely in the industry here. I think we spent an hour discussing if these are actually the terms or not, and apparently they are. And again, there's the space to list the material, the certifications, and so on. You'll see that for the footwear, there's no percentage of composition requested, and that's because this information isn't usually used within the footwear sector. It is used within apparel because obviously it's going on the labels, but in footwear there's foams and linings and all sorts of bits and bobs going on. And for hard goods, we only have 3 material spaces for now. Again, hard goods is a difficult one because it could be a helmet and it could be a crampon and it could be a pole. So it's much more difficult to name the components. But we're working on this section actually now with the ski industry and with some hard goods brands to try and make this section better. For now, it's limited and we know that, but we have a plan to make it work. This is where I would do the live demonstration. So what we did was we rolled this out in July this year, and that was quite an intentional date because we heard from the group that in August, September, they're going into their communications and they'll start to be, we wanted to use it for the ordering cycle fall winter 24-25. So we did quite a deliberate strategic date release. We're asking we rolled it out outside of our group. This is not a tool just for the EOG and the members. This is a tool for everybody. And if we want to increase adoption of this one way, obviously we need to make it free and available for anybody at any time. We're asking anyone who attended the webinars, we're asking retailers to offer it as a solution to brands, and we're asking brands to push back a bit on retailers and say, from now on, we're not filling in 200 questionnaires, we'll be filling in 1. It should answer all of your questions, and here it is. So we're kind of relying on brands and retailers to manage that process between them. On both the European Outdoor Group and the BSI website, we have the questionnaire, a tutorial video, the launch webinar, so you can watch the webinars, you can see the live demonstration, and the tool is there ready to download and use going forward. So what next is we know the hard goods section needs some work, and there will not be a workshop this afternoon. That was a summit a few weeks ago. We're also hearing quite loud and clear from retailers that going forwards, retailers are going to start asking for a CO2 footprint per product. Obviously, this creates a huge amount of challenges for brands, and I'm not going to go into those challenges here because that is a whole other discussion. But retailers are telling us this is where they are going. We're also putting in a process to allow automated data import. We're also talking about should we include trims and zips. For now, we've only been talking about fabrics and main components, but should actually zips be included? Again, we don't know. We're going to be guided by policy on this. There's a discussion around the certifications management. We've been working with Outra, who is widely used within the outdoor industry, and they're a kind of digital platform that links brands and retail. Up until now, they look at things like stock availability and stock management and images, and they're kind of a middle platform to kind of transfer lots of information. So they are the obvious partner to kind of host this if it becomes a digital platform. We'll start those discussions next week. And there's a possibility for raw data conversion. And what we mean here is we've heard from some brands that working with their PLM systems, they cannot, if they export a CSV file, they cannot navigate the drop-down lists. So we're looking at ways to convert that data automatically. We've since heard, since we launched the tool, one of the members of the group have actually gone ahead and started working with Excel Master to develop that tool already. So that's what we've been doing. We're going to revisit this in January 2024. This was our original plan. We've kind of launched it to the industry. We did the kind of small-scale pilot tests, and then we're considering this a kind of industry large-scale pilot test. So we've thrown it out. We're listening what people say to us, and we're going to open it up in January again next year to kind of make any more changes that we need to do. Since we launched it in January, we've heard that going forward, Bergfreunde and Yonderland will accept this and are pushing to only accept this as their preferred tool. So that's a huge, that's a huge win for the industry in general really, because so many brands are working with these kind of parent, Yonderland's a parent group working with lots of different retailers. So this can actually reduce a lot of impact on many businesses. If anyone would like to be included in this process, please let us know. And just to say thanks to the project group. So I think one question we've had a lot since we launched it is kind of what's the industry feel on this? We know that many of the brands who took part are insisting that this is the only one they'll use going forward. So organisations like Mammut and Mountain Equipment and so on and so forth, and many retailers have adopted it. And I know that there's probably not many CSR people here, but there's a lot of design and development people. And the kind of final point I want to make is this is what's happening on the CSR managers' desks right now. This is one thing on their massive pile of work that they have to do. Policy, preparation for implementation. So I would encourage you as kind of developers and designers to think about what's happening further up the chain. So for your colleagues in CSR and sustainability, and if you can get any data for them during your designs, if you can select fabrics where data is available or information is available, then that is greatly appreciated by your colleagues later up. So yeah, great thanks to the group. They were wonderful. Hopefully that made sense. And
before we get too much into offering congratulations to Katy, I was very fortunate last week. I got to go to the European Outdoor Summit, the cranial meeting of all the leaders of this industry we work in. And there were two standout moments. One was there was a professional lobbyist from Brussels who just made the very subtle point about the textile laissez-faire attitude towards legislation. She talked about the automotive, and she talked about the cosmetics industry and the food industry. They know when legislation comes in, if you are not compliant, you do not operate. We have textile legislation coming in. We have dates, and she's amazed at how relaxed we are towards it. The other thing was the president of the EOG stood up because it was a very severe questioning session, and he openly said, look, if you want us more as the trade body to put resource into this to help brief you, we will do it. We will facilitate it. But we're an organisation. We need money. So this is not Katy saying join the European Outdoor Group. It's Charles saying join the European Outdoor Group. Because if we share the load, we're going to get to the answer a lot better. But that's just Charles ranting on about statements, okay? Can we offer our appreciation to Katy for that presentation? And I'm not going to let her escape from the stage. I'm going to ask her to sit on the chair, and I'm going to ask her a bit more about incoming legislation. Now, this is the exciting bit, because Katy doesn't know what I'm going to ask her. She says, Charles, if we've got any time, ask us a question. So it's to try and get a higher level question. The big thing on everyone's desk right now is the incoming EU Green Deal.
Yes.
Without showing how unprepared we are, how concerned should we? How focused should we be? If we are the designers and the fabric developers, how much is it going to change our world? Because you will have heard it's going to affect 20% of the apparel industry. How do you interpret that?
From a design perspective, I think there will be a huge amount of initiatives that will... What's the word? Yeah, I'm not going to say restrictions, but there's going to need to be a lot more thought about fabrics that are selected and the way in which they're used. There's also going to need to be a lot more information flying around. I mean, the panel that Charles mentioned was called "No Data, No Business, No Data, No Compliance, No Business." And I think even if it's just moving of resources, this is something that everybody will probably experience within their organisations going forward. I think what was interesting for me at the summit last week is nobody expects how much policy is to come. I mean, we had a mapping done for the EOG, so we had all of the policies that will in some way impact our industry, and we have 42 pieces of legislation on there, covering everything from materials to production to supply chains to social compliance to everything. So I think from an organisational perspective, there will have to be resource. The way in which organisations are resourced will have to change, because the current models will work for not much longer.
Now, those British people who might remember something called Fixing Fashion, which was a policy towards the same ambition, but big business lobbied against it. And when big business lobbied against it, they actually stopped it being implemented. It was interesting talking to Pascal, and she was asked the question about deferment and lobbying. And she had a very simple answer saying, no, legislation happens.
Yeah. I think
stop.
the other point to make is in 2024, the European Commission will change. There'll be an election next year. So there's a huge amount of pressure to push a lot of the policies through at the moment. Some of them, as Delena talked about, they're not actually ready, but because the current policymakers, the current parliament, they don't want them to fall by the wayside. So there's a huge amount of pressure at the moment to push things through that aren't necessarily fully formed or doing a good job at reducing impact. So, yeah, I mean, this is not a yes or no. This is a in or out question.
In a very patronising way, I'm going to treat you as my students. The EU Green Deal, I will be assisted by my colleague on the other side of the stage, has 3 areas that really comes into textiles. One is the eco-design module. One is the provenance, and one is the green claims, the marketing. I'm not here to talk about green claims. It makes a lot of sense. Lawyers will get even richer. The provenance, I'm actually really impressed by what's open to us in the outdoor industry. We have the right schemes in the right places. We just need to get on board with them. I know I come from Manchester, or I live 30 miles from Manchester. which is the home to Pretty Little Things, Boohoo, and all the other brands that I don't want to proudly say are British, they're really, really worried. And I look at the status of the outdoor brands, and I do not feel we're going to be shaken by that, because it's a simple case. We know what we've got to do. We're set up to do it. Our rivals are already doing it. It's relatively easy to get on board, which brings us to eco-design.
I think as well, kind of one point on that is the outdoor and sports industry, we're driven by performance. So intrinsically, our products are stronger. In most cases, they're made out of better materials. So we're kind of one step ahead of fashion, and certainly fast fashion. So we're in a really good starting place, but it will definitely cause impact. And I think in the next 2-3 years, we're going to see there's going to be a huge amount of change in the industry. I think a lot of brands and organisations are going to lose and going to be out.
And the third area was eco-design, which is directly relevant to our audience. Essentially, to summarise it, if we can use recycled yarns, if we can make it repairable, you'll get through. It doesn't mean your existing designs are going to fail, but we will fade them out. I've already got Mark disagreeing with me, so I need to come to Mark on this. Yes, it does only apply to white goods at the moment.
In the EU.
Yes.
Because in France, as part of the Loi GEC, they have a repairability index.
Yes.
And they're actually developing a durability index.
This is what we're expecting to come. Like at the moment, we talked about PU membranes, and we know membranes with solvents in will be targeted next. We're trying to make you future-proof, if that's not too depressing. It is relatively straightforward, but it is going to take a change of thinking, a change of approach. And I'm hoping that this industry raises the bar to it. But Katy, what would you add to the thoughts on the EU Green Deal? What's the takeaway message that they should have, apart from join the EOG?
No, I mean, obviously it's great if you join the EOG, but you don't have to. There's a huge amount of resources available. I would recommend anyone to check the Ohana blog, OHANA. They're a public affairs organisation based in Brussels, and they do a really fantastic blog which takes different pieces of policy and legislation and talks through them. I think from my perspective, it's about systems and harmonising and making internal operations as smooth as possible. And this comes back to the SDEX project. If we can, if someone's spending hundreds of amount of hours per week, per month, filling in these Excel sheets, and we can actually take that away and they fill it in once, then that's a huge amount of spare time to do something else, to look at the other different policies, to think about the other compliance they have to deal with. I think another thing that needs to be thought about is whose responsibility the policy and compliance is. What we see as the EOG is it falls in different places within the organisation. Sometimes it falls in quality controls, sometimes it falls in everywhere. And I think another piece of advice would be to familiarise yourselves within your organisations. Who's taking care of this? Who needs the information? Who's asking the questions? Whose actual role and responsibility is this? Not just related to the policy and compliance, but also to the kind of data exchange in general. Where's that happening and who's doing it?
Now, the other question, and it's going to be the last question, totally different point of view. You've been with the EOG for 8 years now. The EOG used to have a sustainability team who used to look after all these matters. But they've been through a fundamental change in that the onus and responsibility now falls to every employee throughout the organisation, in that everyone now has their eyes open, and it has freed you guys to be able to look at newer projects. So the actual corporate social responsibility is owned by the whole of the setup. So the question I want to ask...
Not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. No, we still have a CSR team.
Yeah.
I think CSR is understood by the wider team, but they're not in. It's not role to actually drive it or to be active on it in any way other than awareness.
Okay.
And I think that's the same for all organisations. You know, whether you're a designer in a brand or whether you're doing marketing, you don't have to take on the role and the day-to-day tasks of sustainability, but you should definitely be aware of what's happening at a policy level, at a compliance level, the general conversation.
Katy's got my question answered, which means I now turn to the audience. Here's your opportunity. Would anyone like to take either talking about the SEDEX project or the other matters which have come up? You've got the opportunity to speak direct. Just stick up your hand. Otherwise, I'll ask Katy another awkward question. I'm going down.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question about your first part, the SEDEX project or program. So as I understand, trying to harmonize the data asks and then capturing that. But what would be the next step? Because you can indeed have access to all this data, but I can imagine that a lot of these organizations would not know how to do the interpretation. What does it actually mean? What are we going to do with that? How can we improve on the basis of that? Is that part of your next steps, or how do you see that?
No. Our project is purely about the communication and transfer of data. I think, I mean, in terms of, there's kind of a few parts of the answer to your question. In terms of next steps, we are looking at can we make this data transfer even easier? You know, this data exists on systems, people are putting it into Excel and then it's going back into a system. How can we cut out that Excel and make it an automated data transfer? Many of you may also be aware that there is a conversation going on at a policy level around digital product passports. So a question that we've been asking as well is, you know, what happens then and does this become obsolete? And we don't know. We heard from the industry they need this now, and we know from the conversations that we're involved in that DPP is a long way off, and the European Commission hasn't actually decided yet who's going to have responsibility for that. Is it going to be organisations? Is it going to be private organisations? So we feel that DPP is so far in the distance that we wanted to just start. There is the possibility that what we do could become part of the DPP, as obviously we're having those discussions as well. So yeah, did that answer your question? Kind of. Yeah, oh, that was the other part. Sorry, I forgot. And I think when it comes to, you know, what is a sustainable product, this is something as well that we get asked all the time. And the point of this questionnaire is not to define what is sustainable, and there's no interpretation required, actually. It's a very hard data transfer. There's, you know, no point of the questionnaire is saying, this passes the recycled content benchmark, or this is clean chemistry. It's literally, has it got this, yes or no? What is the percentage of recycled content? So there's no need for interpretation of the data because it's a pure data transfer.
Yeah, indeed my question was related to that, because I have the feeling that often we get a bit blindsided by the need to acquire that data, but then data is just a tool, but it becomes a goal. So then it's great, in this case it's great if you have it, but then indeed what are we going to do with it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something we discussed at the beginning as well, and some of the brands said the retailers are asking for data, but they don't really know why. They just feel that they need to do something sustainable. And this was a kind of adding to the frustration. You know, we're filling in this questionnaire and no one actually knows what they're going to do with it. So when I said earlier, you know, sometimes it's for consumer communication, sometimes it's for website structure, sometimes it's for absolutely nothing at all other than they think they should be. Yeah. So I think what we've actually done with the questionnaire is we've kind of preempted what's useful data and what isn't. And everything that isn't is, and everything that is important is in there.
Now, I'm not seeing any other hands, and I also won't pick on Katy because there's some really interesting live points at the moment. I don't know if any of you have picked up that potentially chemically recycled materials are going to lose GRS certification. I know it's an ongoing debate at the moment, which is why I'm glad I have people wiser than myself. But those are ongoing issues. I've also noticed in the audience, you've really pulled in some of the people I admire to this session. We have Anna, sorry to embarrass you, who leads ISPO practice at the Green Room Voice. We have Kirsty, who leads Scandinavia on CSR matters. And we have another Anna at the back who's trying not to look at me, who we respect as a design guru. The very fact that we have those three coming to listen to Katy, to me, endorses why we should have Katy. So I'm very grateful, and I'd like you to show your appreciation once again to Katy Stevens.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everybody.